Ever hear an old game soundtrack and feel like you just time traveled back to your childhood? Or maybe you boot up a game that you just maybe haven't played in years and suddenly it feels magical again. Even if it is a clunky, outdated game and nowhere near as polished as a modern game. Maybe it's an old 8-bit Mario game, a low polygon PlayStation game, or maybe some kind of 2000s shooter game with really chunky UI. Why do old games feel special, even when they have obvious flaws? Why does nostalgia always insist on hitting us so hard in the feels? Well, today we're diving into why nostalgia makes us love old games, and why we can get so emotional over them, even if they don't hold up to the standards of today's games. Nostalgia is a powerful thing, and it's not just about remembering something, it's about feeling something. More specifically, how it made us feel at a certain point in our lives. That could be laughing during the easy times of life, or struggling to get by through the lowest times in our existences. Let's think back to when you first played your favorite video game. This could be when you were a kid, or it could have just been last month. Everything felt new, exciting, and full of wonder. You likely weren't comparing graphics with every game on the market, looking up performance videos on YouTube to see which console you needed to buy it for, or writing down what aspects of the gameplay you loved and which ones you wish they had handled differently, like some kind of gaming journalist. You were just having fun. And because we tie memories to these experiences, replaying an old game can bring those same feelings rushing back. It's why you can hear an old Zelda song for the 100th time in a row, or a Halo menu track that you haven't heard in years, but instantly be transported back to a very different time in your life. Why do you think you can't go more than maybe, 5 gaming videos on YouTube, especially the video essays I watch, without hearing Mario 64's Jolly Roger Bay, or Ocarina of Time's Zelda's Lullaby? People just connect to these sort of things. I don't really know the most about music, I've never been talented in that field, but I know without a shadow of a doubt that there's something magical about it. I'm not just talking about catchy pop music that you hear on the radio 50 times a day like the Espresso song. But there's no denying that music has this weird innate ability to make us laugh or cry, make us feel love, or make us feel really sad, or pump us up if we're about to do some sporting event or something. The most powerful thing though about nostalgia to me is how it really is the closest thing you can get to some kind of sci-fi time travel portal. I mean, think about it. This is why it's possible to be nostalgic about games that you don't even really think are that good. Nostalgia is about the past experiences, not the current one that you're in the middle of. When I boot up SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom, half the time I'm not even doing anything really. I'm just roaming around listening to the music in the background. That's because the game is just a vessel or a key in order to reach those old memories. Take a game like the old Madden NFL entries of the 2000s. Dated for sure, and like I said, they end up making those every year, so they're kind of replaceable. But my dad and I used to play those all the time, and when I was a kid, I just hoped I could one day beat him. I would train and play all day when he was at work, only for him to come back home and still beat me. But I still remember the first day that I did. I actually teared up a bit, if I'm being honest. It was such an achievement for me, not even in the game, but a thing just between me and him that only us understood. And yes, even though the Madden these days are not as good, I can never truly hate the franchise because I know of all the memories that are connected with it. The same goes for Harvest Moon Magical Melody for GameCube. It's not really a game that I personally am crazy about, but I still enjoy it a tad bit every now and then because it reminds me when I would sit at home with my mom and watch her play before I was old enough to go to school. And we would organize lists of what characters loved what gifts and how to get all the animals or the different prizes at the events. Honestly, in a way, I think I probably got some of my completionist ideas from her. And nowadays, when I'm looking up guides and I'm trying to strategically make sure I can get everything done in a playthrough, it kind of reminds me of when we used to do that. You can also take the old WWE SmackDown vs. Raw games. I used to make a lot of videos on those when I was kind of a partial wrestling channel. But when I was a kid in elementary school and middle school, I got made fun of a little bit for really loving wrestling. After all, this wasn't the 90s when it was cool all the time. People were finding out that it was fake, and if you liked wrestling, well, you were kind of a doofus. But I've always been a John Cena fan, even to this day. And when I finally met one of my friends who also liked wrestling, We bonded over the shows, the action figures, and especially the games. I remember going over to each other's houses, making the stupidest looking created wrestlers, messing with the referees, throwing each other off of cages, and just stupid stuff. We would look up glitch videos of the games and just whatever we could to have a laugh with it. And finally, last but not least, there's Animal Crossing New Horizons. This game is not even very old. It released in 2020, but even if 20 more Animal Crossings come out that are all better than New Horizons, I'll still remember it for being the game that my wife and I first connected on during the COVID season, when we lived an hour apart and we couldn't always see each other very often, so we'd visit each other's islands and bring gifts to each other. But even with all that being said, sometimes that rose-tinted nostalgia does make us forget a game's flaws. Now, it's time to be real, not all old games hold up. Tank controls, weird hit detection, bad camera angles, and low frame rates from some old games, brutal difficulty spikes. I mean, there are plenty of things in classic games that were fine then due to some technical limitations or just not knowing better, but these things would not really ever fly today. Take some of the early Resident Evil games with the tank controls. You know, they were an early PS1 era shooter. It's not like at this point anybody had truly perfected the experience yet, and it was a far cry from what we got in 2005 with Resident Evil 4. But here's the thing, nostalgia makes us forgive these flaws. If you played a game as a kid, you probably just got used to its quirks. It was just part of the game. The bad camera, you adapted. The weird difficulty, well, you just kept trying. These things didn't really matter as much because you were too busy enjoying the experience. Unless you're one of those kids that your parents went out and bought you every video game the day it released, you probably didn't get to buy a ton of video games when they actually came out. So if a game you got wasn't amazing, you just made the most of it. Some games that I really loved as a kid, but now I realize are kind of mid, are games like some of the old sports titles I mentioned. Power Rangers Dino Thunder, still really love it, but again, I realize it's a Power Rangers game. Several of the Pixar/DreamWorks licensed movie games, various beat-em-ups like Teen Titans and some TMNT games, and most notoriously, Sonic Heroes. These are games that I wouldn't have wanted to live without as a kid, but now I own more as a memory or an inside joke when those friends or family come over that remember those goofy experiences. Rarely do I ever sit down and actually play those games, outside of a random video or stream I might do on here just for the memes. And when we go back to those games after a while, you can get one of two experiences. Sometimes those flaws are a lot harder to ignore, and sometimes we just don't care. Because like I said, it's not about the game, it's about the memories. Alright, now it's time for a bit of a plot twist. Have you ever seen an old game, one that you maybe, I don't know, never even played, and still feel a weird sense of nostalgia? For the longest time, I thought this was just me. I thought I was crazy or just a junkie for nostalgia. I'd be on Instagram or TikTok, and I'd see these reels of people lining outside, you know, waiting to buy the PS2 when it launched, or people talking about buying the 64 when it came out, and I would get this sense of, oh yeah, man, those were the good days. But I never did those things. Like, I was born in 2000. By the time those consoles came out, I either wasn't alive or was way too young to even partake in that. The closest thing I could get to that is maybe my dentist office that had Mario Sunshine, Pikmin 2, and the original Lego Star Wars game on GameCube. And then we had our local McDonald's, had some game systems in the play area, and I remember they had a GameCube with like a Tony Hawk game, and then they had an N64 with Mario Party 3. But believe it or not, this wasn't just me. This actually happens all the time. Probably to more people than you realize. So if it's happened to you, definitely don't feel bad. Maybe it's some old classic Mario game, a PS2 era RPG, or some kind of pixel art platformer. Even if you didn't grow up with it, it feels familiar. My most recent experience encountering this kind of unexpected nostalgia was just the other day with the game Halo. I didn't play the original Halos on the original Xbox because, again, I was too young and my parents got me a GameCube because it was more kid-friendly. I didn't actually play the Halo games all the way through until high school in the late 2010s. You know, well after the prime of their run in the 2000s, and well after their Bungie days, you know, pre-343 Industries taking them out to the crapper out back. But even knowing this, I saw this TikTok video. Yes, I know, I'm on TikTok. But I saw this video about people talking about the days of the LAN parties and people waiting outside GameStop at midnight for Halo 3, staying up all night eating Doritos, Taco Bell, you know, those gamer fuel Mountain Dews that they used to make. I don't know, I got a rush of nostalgia and thought of, man, like, I really wish I could go back to those days. I would love to kind of engage in that, but sadly, I'll never be able to. It could be in part because I yearn to experience what other people I know speak so highly of, but again, all this comes back to, if I've never experienced that, then how can I be feeling these same nostalgia feelings? Well, my friend, that is because nostalgia is actually not just purely personal, it can also be cultural. If you've been a gamer for life, like myself, and I know that sounds really cringe saying that now, but we grew up seeing these games in magazines, watching friends play them, hearing the soundtracks in the background. Our brains associate them with a time period, a certain vibe, if you will, or feeling of the past. It's also how I can get nostalgic when I see those 2000s videos with Mr. Brightside and Nickelback and Fall Out Boy playing, kids wearing Heelys, drinking Vault. I wonder how many of you remember Vault. But they wear their spiky hair, flaunt their Motorola's, and driving their Honda Civics and Nissan Skylines and such. I don't know, probably why Fast and Furious 1 and 2 are my favorite movies. I never experienced those things because, let's be honest, I was too young. I was sitting at home watching SpongeBob playing Lego Star Wars, and if I was listening to anything, it was the WWE theme songs and VeggieTales songs that my parents had on their CD player. I mean, eventually they got me upgraded to an iPod Nano where I could listen to Weird Al and Black Eyed Peas, and yeah, I'm beginning to worry about myself too. But I did grow up in part of this generation, the later 2000s and then obviously the 2010s. But yet I feel like I identify and connect with these things, even if I never actually connected with those things during that time. It just goes to show how powerful nostalgia, and especially cultural nostalgia, can be. It's crazy to think about the differences in generations and what people will find nostalgic later in life. I'm getting to the point where I don't really consider Minecraft a new or even semi-modern game, even with updates, because I was having sleepovers playing that on the 360 back in like 2012, 2013, 2014. My in-law siblings were over a couple weeks ago, and they're a bit younger than my siblings who are all either adults or in high school, but one of them that's 14, I think, tried to tell me that he was nostalgic for Fortnite, to which I replied, how? That game came out when I was in high school. It was then that I realized the game came out before I graduated, and I graduated high school 6 years ago. Yeah, so I guess I'm officially hitting that stage in life. And my other brother-in-law, that's only around 10, then saw me playing Sonic X Shadow Generations, and he tried to tell me that the only people that play Sonic games were, quote, either really, really old people that played the first one when it came out, or really little kids. There's no in between. I didn't know what to say to that one. So, with all this being said, my main question is, do old games actually hold up? Or is it nostalgia? Well, I have two answers to that. The first one, I'll say, it depends. Some classic games are timeless. Their mechanics, art style, and design choices still feel great today. Games like Super Mario 64, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, some of the old Halo games, even Half-Life 2, a game I haven't played, but I know it holds up well because people talk about how it's built on solid gameplay and design fundamentals. But some others, like I mentioned earlier, not so much. Some old games feel clunky, frustrating, or just outdated in ways that make them hard to enjoy now. But the second answer to that question that I mentioned, the one that I actually feel is the real answer, is, does it really matter? Now, I know I just answered a question with a question, but hear me out. A common thing that I see in the gaming community is arguments over nostalgia. Some people love it, and they base all their opinions on nostalgia. And those are often the "they don't make them like they used to" crowd. They're always complaining, never happy, and often will mention how they hate the gaming industry and it'll die soon because of AAA games and their companies. They hate people for loving new modern games, and if you enjoy a casual game of Fortnite with the friends maybe once a month or so, then you don't get to talk about video games. You're not a real gamer. On the other side, we have the more modern-minded gamers who all want 100-hour open-world games with plenty of DLC, and if your favorite game doesn't play in 4K 120 FPS or it isn't a battle royale, then you, my friend, are a geezer living in the past with your rose-tinted glasses and content to waffle around in games littered in pixels and polygons showing freely. My opinion, just don't give a you know what. Play what you want to play and leave others alone. If someone else chooses to try to dump on you for your favorite game being different than theirs, oh well, just ignore them. That's less time they get to spend playing their favorite games. After all, that's why remakes and remasters exist, to let us experience nostalgic favorites with modern improvements. But that being said, some people still won't be happy, and no matter how faithful to the original or how much love was poured in, people will spit on the newer, prettier, smoother game. People will hate it if it's faithful to the original for not being new and innovative enough, but if they change too much, people will say it's a completely different game. Which is why gamers are the perfect people to date, ladies. Some of them couldn't care less about looks, and personality is all that matters to them. They're super loyal and they'll never leave you because they only want the OG. And when you're old and gray and 80 years old, they'll still love it because they're still playing 80-year-old video games, so what does it matter? All in all, does nostalgia trick us into thinking old games were better? Yeah, sometimes they do. But sometimes those classics really are as amazing as we remember. At the end of the day, nostalgia is a powerful, powerful part of gaming. It connects us to our past, brings us back amazing memories, and sometimes maybe makes us love a game a little more than we probably should. But I want to hear from you. What's a game that gives you instant nostalgia? Is there an old game that you still love playing today? Maybe it's a game that is a classic all time. Or it's a game that you realize is not that great. Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you love talking about games like this, consider our community Discord. The link's in the description, where we've got an awesome group of gamers who dive into gaming nostalgia, hidden gems, and deep discussions. And if you want to support the channel and help me make even more content, check out my Patreon. Every little bit helps and I truly appreciate it. Those links are also in the description. And last but not least, if you are nostalgic for some old games, say original Mario, original Zelda, or original Sonic, I recently did a couple videos on those, so I'll put some of them on the screen. Check them out.